Have you ever wondered why some women seem to slip past the strongest of men's defenses, touching parts of them even they had long buried? Most people believe a man's walls are impenetrable, that his silence is a fortress built for eternity. Yet the truth is far more paradoxical. What looks unshakable is often trembling beneath the surface, waiting for the right presence to dissolve it. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious is always seeking integration, and the feminine carries hidden powers that call the masculine out of exile, powers that do not scream or demand, but whisper in ways his soul cannot ignore. Tonight, those powers can shatter the walls he thought would keep you out forever. The first hidden power is the radiance of presence, a quality often misunderstood. It is not the constant availability that many women mistake for love, nor the frantic effort to fill silence with reassurance. True presence is stillness laced with vitality, the energy of a woman fully anchored in her body, her breath, her own awareness. When a man encounters this, his unconscious begins to tremble. His walls, designed to deflect intrusion, cannot defend against presence because it does not attack. Instead, it enfolds. Imagine this: your gaze meets his, and without words, without pleading, he feels seen, not for the image he projects, but for the fragments he hides. This awakens both terror and hunger, because being seen is the very thing his ego resists and his soul craves. And so, his walls weaken, not from your insistence, but from your unwavering rootedness in yourself. The second power is vulnerability, though not the diluted kind shaped by manipulation. Real vulnerability is the courage to reveal without collapsing, to open without begging. It is not the performance of weakness but the strength of truth. A man, raised in a world that worships stoicism and punishes softness, often locks his emotions behind iron gates. Yet when he encounters a woman who embodies vulnerability with dignity, he experiences something new, a permission slip for his own hidden tears, his own suppressed grief. Jung described this as the meeting of shadows. Your revealed fragility invites his shadowed emotions into the light. He feels safe not because you demand it, but because your openness proves survival is possible on the other side of exposure. Vulnerability, paradoxically, becomes power, the key that slides quietly into the locks of his heart. The third power is erotic sovereignty, the unspoken magnetism of a woman who knows her body is hers before it is anyone else's. This power is not seduction in the shallow sense, but embodiment of desire without apology. Men build walls not only against love, but against the terror of losing control. When a woman radiates sovereign sensuality, an energy that is warm, playful, and unshamed, his defenses shift. He no longer feels the need to conquer, for conquest is meaningless when faced with a woman who cannot be taken, only received. His unconscious begins to drop its armor, drawn by the rare experience of intimacy that does not strip him of freedom but invites him into co-creation. The walls crumble because he senses she does not need him, and yet she welcomes him, a paradox too powerful for his barriers to withstand. The fourth power is emotional alchemy, the ability to transform the raw materials of pain, frustration, and fear into something sacred. A man may hide behind cynicism, sarcasm, or withdrawal, but when confronted with a woman who can transmute conflict into depth, despair into wisdom, his fortress begins to dissolve. She does not mirror back his chaos with more chaos, she mirrors it with the possibility of transformation. In her presence, his anger softens into confession, his silence breaks into truth. Alchemy is not about erasing pain but reshaping it, and when she demonstrates this capacity, he feels his walls becoming unnecessary. Why defend, when his darkest parts can finally be turned into gold? The fifth and final hidden power is sovereign detachment, the silent knowing that she does not need his intimacy to be whole. It is here that his unconscious shatters most violently, for walls are sustained only when a man believes he holds the keys. But in the presence of a woman who no longer seeks entry, who stands radiant and free, his defenses collapse into dust. He realizes that intimacy is not demanded, it is chosen. And suddenly, he wants to choose it. His pursuit begins not because she asked, but because she no longer waits. Presence, vulnerability, erotic sovereignty, emotional alchemy, and sovereign detachment, these 5 hidden feminine powers do not come as techniques to be practiced but as states of being to be remembered. When a man encounters them, he is not simply moved by attraction, he is destabilized at the level of his unconscious. His walls, though crafted from years of hurt, conditioning, and fear, were never meant to withstand archetypal forces. They were built to protect him from the superficial, from the ordinary. But when the extraordinary stands before him, a woman embodying her archetypal essence, his fortress begins to feel less like protection and more like a prison. Jung suggested that every man secretly longs for the anima, the inner feminine image that offers him wholeness, and when she appears in living form, his barriers crack under the weight of recognition. The radiance of presence works like firelight in a darkened cave. It does not demand attention, it naturally pulls the gaze. In the masculine psyche, presence confronts his flight from stillness. He has been taught to survive through motion, distraction, and endless striving. Yet in the company of a woman rooted in her being, he feels a kind of gravity. His walls, which thrive on avoidance, cannot hold against the unspoken invitation to simply be. And so, though he may resist at first, his body betrays him, his breath slows, his eyes soften, his guard lowers. You, in your presence, awaken the ancient memory that intimacy is not a transaction, but a return home. Vulnerability then strikes at the very core of his defenses. Men are trained to equate vulnerability with weakness, to armor themselves against shame and rejection. But when faced with vulnerability expressed not as collapse but as courage, he experiences dissonance. His walls, designed to shield him from exposure, begin to falter because her openness is not weaponized, it is offered. And in that offering, he feels a permission he has never known, the right to be human, imperfect, wounded, and still worthy of love. Vulnerability disarms because it speaks a language older than logic. It says, I am not afraid of being seen. And in hearing it, he begins to whisper to himself, perhaps I do not have to be afraid either. Erotic sovereignty pierces him next, for it dismantles the illusion that intimacy is about ownership. His walls, often built to protect against being consumed, crumble in the presence of a woman who cannot be consumed because she belongs to herself. Her energy communicates, without words, that intimacy is not conquest but communion. She does not seduce by lowering her value, but by elevating her self-possession. And the paradox he cannot resist is this, the very independence that means she does not need him is what makes him want her more. His barriers, built on fear of losing control, cannot withstand the truth that real desire thrives only in freedom. The power of emotional alchemy reshapes his defenses entirely. When his anger meets her grace, when his withdrawal meets her patience, when his fear meets her calm, his walls lose their purpose. They no longer serve to protect him from chaos, because she is proof that chaos can be transformed. The masculine unconscious recognizes, often without words, that here is someone who will not magnify his wounds but transmute them. It is in this recognition that his fortress begins to feel redundant. Why defend, when there is no attack? Why hide, when shadows can be turned into light? And sovereign detachment stands as the final, most devastating power. For when a woman no longer clings, no longer waits for validation, no longer aches for approval, she becomes untouchable. His walls collapse not because she pushes against them, but because she no longer needs to enter. This realization breaks him open. Intimacy is not hers to beg for, it is his to choose, and the urgency to choose is ignited by her indifference. She does not chase, and so he must. When his walls begin to falter, what he fears most is not the collapse itself but the flood of emotions waiting behind them. For years, perhaps decades, he has armored himself against the vulnerability of love. And yet, in the presence of feminine powers, that armor begins to rust and fall away, piece by piece. He discovers that intimacy is not a threat but a summons, an initiation into parts of himself he has long abandoned. Jung wrote of the confrontation with the unconscious as both terrifying and liberating, for it forces a man to face what he would rather keep buried. And the feminine, in her archetypal strength, becomes the mirror that makes such confrontation unavoidable. Presence unsettles him because it offers no escape. He cannot hide behind performance when her stillness cuts through pretense. It is not the words she says, but the energy she holds, that strips him bare. His walls depend on her chasing, on her scrambling for validation, on her over-explaining. But when she simply exists in her grounded energy, his defenses lose their grip. He feels as though the fortress he built so carefully suddenly has no doors, because she never tried to enter through force. She simply illuminated the truth that walls cannot stop light. Vulnerability frightens him because it challenges the very narrative he was raised upon. He has been told that strength is hardness, that protection means concealment. But when she reveals her heart without breaking, he encounters a strength far greater than his armor, the strength to remain soft in a world of knives. It shakes him to his core. His walls, meant to keep emotion at bay, crumble because he sees that vulnerability is not weakness, it is power. And in that moment, he feels a flicker of courage to reveal himself too. Erotic sovereignty disrupts his defensive structures in ways he cannot rationalize. His walls were built against neediness, against the fear of being smothered or trapped. Yet she is untethered, sovereign, radiant in her sensuality without demanding his approval. This paradox both terrifies and entices him. He recognizes that she cannot be possessed, and yet her magnetism pulls him closer. The walls he erected to protect his autonomy suddenly feel irrelevant, because she has no interest in stripping it from him. Instead, she invites him into a dance of freedom meeting freedom. His barriers collapse not out of defeat, but out of surrender to something more expansive than control. Emotional alchemy transforms his defenses into ashes. His fortress was built on the fear that emotions would destroy him if left unchecked. Yet she demonstrates that emotion can be transmuted into wisdom, into intimacy, into power. When his anger meets her calm, when his distance meets her depth, his walls falter. He realizes they were never keeping him safe, they were keeping him stagnant. She does not fight his defenses head-on, she melts them by showing that even his darkest shadows can be reshaped into light. In her presence, his unconscious learns what his conscious mind has denied: intimacy is healing, not harm. Sovereign detachment delivers the final blow. For nothing dismantles a man's walls more quickly than realizing she does not need to break them down. When she stands radiant, complete, and free, his defenses collapse under the weight of their own futility. He understands, perhaps for the first time, that intimacy cannot be earned through walls, nor withheld through silence. He sees that she will not wait forever. And suddenly, urgency overtakes him. He must move closer, not because she pleads, but because he knows that if he doesn't, he will lose the rarest thing he has ever encountered. The moment his walls collapse, he does not fall into weakness but into truth. For the fortress he carried was never strength, it was fear, disguised as discipline, built to keep him from a wound too old to name. And now, standing before a woman who embodies presence, vulnerability, erotic sovereignty, emotional alchemy, and sovereign detachment, he sees himself reflected with startling clarity. His armor, so heavy, no longer feels necessary. He realizes that intimacy is not a loss of power but a return to wholeness. Jung described individuation as the process of reclaiming the fragmented self, and here it happens not through force but through resonance. The unconscious of the man responds to the archetypal call of the feminine. Presence leaves him with no choice but honesty. A woman rooted in her essence cannot be deceived by shadows. She sees, not because she is invasive, but because her stillness makes hiding impossible. And so his walls collapse because concealment becomes meaningless. Vulnerability follows, weaving its quiet spell. When she opens without shame, his defenses lose their purpose. He feels the terror of being known, but also the relief of no longer pretending. Erotic sovereignty then strikes him with paradox. She does not need his desire, and yet her unapologetic sensuality awakens his. His walls, built to protect against being consumed, crumble because she has no intention to consume. She embodies freedom, and in her freedom, he feels safe enough to step closer. Emotional alchemy continues the dismantling. His fortress was forged in fear that his darkness would be too much for anyone to bear. Yet she transforms what he brings, meeting chaos with grounded depth. He watches as his walls, once shields against rejection, become unnecessary in the face of a woman who does not shun shadow but reshapes it. And then, finally, sovereign detachment delivers the truth: she is whole without him. She does not linger outside his walls, begging to be let in. She walks freely, radiant and self-possessed, carrying the knowing that intimacy is her birthright, not her burden. It is in this detachment that his last defense shatters. He realizes she is not asking to be chosen, she is choosing herself. And if he wishes to remain near, he must choose as well. This is the paradox that destroys every barrier: intimacy is not something to chase, nor something to demand. It is the natural gravity of a woman in her archetypal power. He cannot help but follow, not because she tricks him, but because she awakens the deepest truth of his being, that connection is not weakness, but strength. His walls dissolve, and what remains is raw, unguarded, alive. For her, this is not conquest. It is remembrance. She has remembered her own hidden powers, and in doing so, reminded him of his. And now, the culmination: she does not wait for him to step forward, nor does she crumble if he does not. She knows her worth, she knows her power, she knows that intimacy cannot be taken from her because it was never dependent on him. Emotional freedom flows through her like a river. She is detached, not in coldness, but in liberation. Reborn, she carries within her a peace untouched by rejection, untouched by fear. And in that peace lies the ultimate truth. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.